Hello folks, I'm Dr. Call and we've been in conversation about diabetes the past few weeks. Of course, you know that we're trying to spread awareness about diabetes leading up to World Diabetes Day in November 2017. This is the 14th of November, of course, but awareness doesn't have to be limited to just that one day. Now, I actually had something planned originally for today, which is really a storytelling session. It was an example of a woman who, through her life, has a number of issues, ranging from polycystic ovarian disease to infertility and eventually breast cancer and everything in between, unfortunately. Just to exemplify how these conditions come to be and where lifestyle plays a role. But I replayed the settings to myself, and I have to say I was extremely embarrassed. And the reason I was embarrassed is because I did exactly what a number of people do to individuals who live with a chronic condition like diabetes. I stigmatized. I reduced an individual, even if it's an example, to a caricature of a human being whose lifestyle was completely at fault and led them into the conditions that they were living with. And that's an extremely oversimplistic view of diabetes or any complex chronic condition for that matter. I'd much rather today focus on the fact that there are individuals who live with the condition but show strength and find ways of living a full life in spite of it. And hopefully through these stream of consciousness relays, I think we'll reach a space where we know what health is and how we define well-being. So I didn't start out talking about diabetes because I want to stigmatize or bring attention to one particular group. It's funny how patients with type 2 diabetes are some of the most stigmatized of individuals because everyone assumes that they have a poor lifestyle, that they are lazy and they fail to engage in enough physical activity, or they eat terrible food. But if you think of individuals who have no other resources, if somebody is running 3 jobs in a day and doesn't have access to the kind of money that helps them buy good quality organic food or the time to prepare it, then can you really demonize them for their lifestyle? Or if you know somebody whose child has a chronic condition, it's easy, in fact, I should say anybody who lives with a chronic condition or who knows of somebody and cares for somebody with a chronic condition automatically becomes the recipient to every advisor in the world about what they should eat and how they should eat it and how they should live. And nobody needs that. Type 1 diabetics are actually another example of this. Firstly, they're completely misunderstood. People assume that type 1 diabetes is very similar to type 2 diabetes, which it isn't. And even if there were similarities, which they are, they're not prevalent, they're not understood in the same context. They're just misunderstood in the same sense of it's probably because you ate too much sugar. That's nonsense. You can't reduce a person to just one thing they ate sometime. Or even a habit, for that matter. Type 1 diabetics, I believe, actually receive a lot of criticism and a lot of advice, which is completely unsolicited from individuals who probably aren't even qualified to be giving advice. Myself included. I mean, there's just no way I can pretend to be a nutritionist or an exercise physiologist. I personally am somebody who understands diabetes from the background of research and long-term complications. I'm a molecular biologist. I researched diabetes for 7-8 years. But that's where my expertise is exhausted. I'm not going to pretend to tell you what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, or how you should live your life. And the same goes for everybody else. Of course, our focus this time is really on women's health and well-being. And one aspect that you can't limit to just women, of course, is that stress is a very predominant aspect of everybody's life. As a woman who perhaps is at risk of diabetes, or a woman who's caring for somebody with diabetes, I think lots of women in that situation will find themselves constantly under the microscope of everyone who judges, who tries to keep an eye on whether you're doing a good enough job of controlling things. There's enough factors in life for us to be stressed and anxious about. There's no need to add more. The other thing that we don't often enough acknowledge is that there is such a thing as overdiagnosis. I'm guilty of dishing out the same story to everybody. I'm very aware that when I tell people that, hey, there are 4 or 5 questions that you need to answer for us to have an estimate of whether or not you have a risk of diabetes, I know deep down that's not a diagnosis. All you're doing is giving somebody a little more stress to believe that they need to change their lifestyle dramatically. Sometimes just a little bit. And who's to say that still won't lead to diabetes? Or another condition? Maybe an eating disorder. Maybe alcoholism. Maybe anorexia. Maybe a very unhealthy relationship with their body. Where do we draw the line? Well, here's a suggestion to you. And maybe you can come up with better ideas for me. I think we draw the line at the point where things feel unhealthy. Whether or not you have a healthcare system supporting you, whether or not you have a general practitioner or an expert in-house who's taking care of you, take the initiative of taking care of yourself. There are just 2 ways of being healthy, I believe, at least. I mean, I'm sure there's multiple theories and hypotheses and principles that might contest my thinking here, but there really have to be 2 factors. The first, knowledge, knowing how you can go about living a healthy life with the means you have. And the second, knowing where to draw the line for yourself, knowing that something is not adding so much more pressure to your living conditions that it in itself becomes a disease for you. If consuming that extra bit of morsel of food is going to become reason for you to unhealthily run for the next 2 hours, or if watching your blood glucose even before you have diabetes, because you have family history of diabetes, is going to send you into stressful spikes that might eventually become misdiagnosed anyway, then you're probably doing something incorrectly. And you're not even at fault. The only thing from all these years of research that I found about diabetes is that you have to try and keep your activity up, and you've got to try and eat healthy. And healthy is as simple as avoid the extremely processed stuff. Eat your fruits, eat your vegetables, eat a balanced meal, and take a walk occasionally. That's really all it is. Everything else is really, it's pretty much an overkill. Still, there are hacks, there are ways of improving your management, there are ways of improving prevention strategies. But I'd still suggest that if you can, take a moment of reflection for yourself and think, what is it that is really missing in my life in terms of health or well-being? And how are some really practical ways I can go about achieving them, as opposed to falling into the fad of the X, Y, and Z diet, or whichever new Instagrammer is doing whatever new power lifts, or any of those ridiculous things. Be driven by something as opposed to being driven to doing things for the sake of fitting in. The stress really does impact you in more ways than one, psychologically, physiologically. That's not worth having. And above all, try not to judge. For somebody who's doing all this from a place of a lot of compassion and care for people with diabetes, a lot of sympathy for individuals who live with this condition, I felt genuinely embarrassed when I replayed my story to myself, because I realized just how demeaning it was to somebody who maybe really did suffer these conditions. And I've never seen myself as far from reality, I think, um, as far from grasping the truth here. I think we all like to overemphasize things from time to time. And of course, awareness is extremely important, but there's a very fine balance between knowing what is right, what is a precautionary move that you make from time to time, and going to the point where you make your whole life about something. And I strongly, strongly advise you, disclaimer attached, to try and just have a healthy balance in life and not be too driven by a promo somewhere or the other. We're all only here for once, for the one lifetime. Try and make the most of it. Try and be active and see more of nature, enjoy more of the fresh air around you, and just stay fit and stay healthy.